My name is Eleanor Hayes, and for most of my life, I believed love meant giving until there was nothing left to give. I was 68 years old before I understood how wrong that was. But I want to start at the beginning because you can't understand what my son did to me unless you understand what I did for him first. Not to excuse anything. Just so you know, I wasn't always the woman who locked her doors and changed her will in secret. I was, for 30 years, simply a mother. A good one, I thought. Maybe too good. I married Robert Hayes when I was 23. He was a quiet man, an electrician, the kind who fixed things without being asked and never once raised his voice in the 31 years we had together. When Daniel was born, Robert held him in the hospital hallway because he was too nervous to hold him in the room, and he cried, this big, callous man, right there in front of the nurses. He's got your stubborn chin, Robert told me that night, grinning like he'd invented the boy himself. He's got your ears, I said. God help him. We laughed about that for years. It was one of those small jokes that outlives its own punchline, the kind that just means we made this person together and we're proud of him. Daniel was an easy child to love, not always an easy child to raise. He had Robert's stubbornness and my temper, a combination that made for some memorable teenage years, but he was warm, generous with his friends, the kind of boy who'd give away his lunch and tell me he wasn't that hungry anyway. I used to worry that softness would get him hurt someday. I worried about the wrong thing. When Robert died, a heart attack, sudden, on a Tuesday in the garage, wrench still in his hand, Daniel was 26. I remember him at the funeral, so still and gray-faced, telling me, I'll take care of you now, Mom. I promise. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? For a while, it even seemed true. He called every Sunday. He came by to fix the porch light Robert never got around to. He'd sit at my kitchen table eating whatever I put in front of him, telling me about his job, his ideas, his plans to really make something of himself. And then, slowly, without either of us quite naming it, the direction of things reversed. It started small. A late rent payment. Just this month, Mom. Work's been slow. Then it was a car repair. Then a temporary gap between jobs that stretched to 4 months. Every time, it was framed as a loan, a one-time thing, a bridge to get him to solid ground. I'll pay you back the second this contract comes through, he told me once, sitting across from me with that same warm, open face he'd had since he was 7 years old. You know I'm good for it. I know, I said. And I didn't know it, or I thought I did. Because that's the thing about loving someone since the day they were born. You keep believing in the boy long after the man in front of you has stopped earning it. I never once sat him down and said, Daniel, this is becoming a pattern. I told myself I was being a good mother. Robert would have wanted me to help him. That's what I told myself. Anyway, lying awake some nights doing the math on what was left in my savings account. I want to be honest with you. I wasn't a saint about it. There were nights I resented him. Nights I'd hang up the phone after another request and sit in the dark kitchen, furious, feeling used and foolish in the same breath. But by morning, I talked myself back into generosity. He's my son. He's family. Family doesn't keep score. That belief, family doesn't keep score, is the one that cost me the most in the end. The first sign that something deeper had shifted, though, wasn't about money at all. It was smaller than that. Almost embarrassing to even bring up, looking back, considering everything that came after. It was Daniel's 40th birthday. Vanessa, his wife of 6 years by then, had planned a dinner. A nice one, at a restaurant downtown with white tablecloths and a wine list thicker than a phone book. I'd offered to help pay for it, of course, because that was simply what I did by then. Vanessa had thanked me sweetly over the phone, told me it was so generous, and said she'd send me the details. The details never came. I found out about the party from my neighbor, Marjorie, who'd seen the photos on Facebook. Daniel in a blue button-down I didn't recognize, Vanessa laughing beside him, Carol, Vanessa's mother, seated at the head of the table like she'd been the one who raised him. I remember standing in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, scrolling through pictures of a party I had paid for and hadn't been invited to, and feeling something shift in my chest that I couldn't yet name. It wasn't quite anger. It wasn't quite grief. It was smaller and colder than both of those, something like being erased. I called Daniel that night. He picked up on the fourth ring, restaurant noise behind him. Hey, Mom, can I call you back? We're kind of in the middle of. I saw the pictures, I said, from your birthday. There was a pause, just long enough for me to hear exactly how much thought he'd put into missing me. Oh, yeah. Vanessa handled the invites. I think there was some mix up with numbers at the venue. It's all right, I said. And I meant it, or I made myself mean it, because the alternative was admitting that my son had celebrated turning 40 without once thinking to save me a seat. I'll take you to lunch this week, I promise, he said. My treat. He never did. Not that week, not the one after. I told myself it was nothing. A scheduling mix-up, a busy season, the ordinary chaos of a young family finding its footing. I was good, back then, at finding reasonable explanations for unreasonable things. It's a skill mothers develop early and unlearn far too late. I didn't know it yet, but that forgotten birthday dinner wasn't a mistake. It was a rehearsal. Looking back now, I can see exactly how it happened, not all at once, but in small increments, each one so minor I could always find a reason to let it go. After the missed birthday, I told myself I'd be more careful. Not with Daniel, with myself. I'd stop assuming, stop filling in gaps with generosity I hadn't been offered proof of. But old habits don't die because you've decided they should. They die when something forces them to. Nothing forced mine to die yet. Not that year. Vanessa called me about 2 weeks after the birthday dinner. Her voice was bright, apologetic in that practiced way some people have, sincere enough on the surface that you feel foolish for doubting it. Eleanor, I feel just terrible about the mix-up, she said. The venue capped us at 20 guests, and I swear I told them to make room for you specifically. I could just kill whoever messed up that list. It's all right, I told her. These things happen. You're so understanding, she said. Honestly, Daniel's lucky to have a mother like you. I remember hanging up the phone feeling almost guilty for having been hurt in the first place. That was Vanessa's particular gift. She could apologize so smoothly that you ended up comforting her. I met Carol, Vanessa's mother, properly for the first time at Thanksgiving that year. Before that, she'd existed for me mostly as a name Daniel mentioned, a voice in the background of phone calls. In person, she was a tall woman with sharp, assessing eyes, the kind of woman who complimented your home while cataloging everything in it. Eleanor, she said, taking my hand at the door like she was the hostess and I the guest. In my own son's house, Daniel's told me so much about you. I understand you've been quite generous with him over the years. I didn't know what to say to that. It wasn't unkind, exactly, but it wasn't warm either. It was a woman letting me know she had information. He's my son, I said. I help where I can. Of course, Carol said, smiling with her mouth only. It's just so important, don't you think, that grown children learn to stand on their own? Vanessa and I have always believed in that. Self-sufficiency. I remember thinking, even then, how strange it was to hear a lecture on self-sufficiency from a woman standing in a house my money had helped keep afloat that year. A fact I was fairly sure Daniel hadn't mentioned to her, or maybe he had. And she simply didn't think it counted the same way once it passed through her daughter's hands. At dinner, I sat near the end of the table. Not deliberately excluded, I told myself. Just how the seating happened to work out. Carol sat at Daniel's right hand, Vanessa across from him. I was 3 seats down, next to Vanessa's cousin, a pleasant young man who spent the meal talking about his fantasy football league. Daniel caught my eye once during dinner, gave me a small smile. You okay, Mom? And I smiled back and nodded, because what else do you do at your son's table? 3 seats from where you used to sit before there was a wife, a mother-in-law, a whole new architecture of belonging that I was, apparently, meant to fit myself around rather than the other way around. After dinner, washing dishes with Vanessa, I'd insisted, needing something to do with my hands. She said something I've turned over in my mind many times since. You know, Eleanor, Mom thinks it's really important that Daniel and I build our own foundation. Financially, I mean, without outside help. I paused, a wet plate in my hand. Outside help. I just mean, like, it's healthier for a marriage if the two of us figure things out ourselves. Build our own credit, our own savings, all that. I know you've helped with some things, and I don't mean that as a criticism. She laughed a little, the sound bright and empty. I think Mom worries it makes Daniel dependent. You know how mothers are. I didn't know how mothers are. I was one. I'd raised the man whose debts I was apparently financing while his wife lectured me, gently, in her own kitchen, about the dangers of dependency. I only ever help when he asks, I said, which was true, and which I said mostly to remind myself. Of course, Vanessa said quickly. I just wanted you to understand where Mom's coming from. She really does think the world of you. I didn't believe that last part. I don't think Vanessa entirely believed it either. But it was the kind of sentence people say to close a conversation rather than continue it, and I let it close. 3 weeks later, Daniel called asking for $8,000. It's the equipment lease on the shop, he said, his voice tight in that particular way it got when he was embarrassed to be asking. I fell behind 2 months, and they're threatening to repossess. If I lose the equipment, I lose the contract with the Hendersons, and if I lose that contract, I don't know how I make rent on the shop at all. Daniel, I sat down at my kitchen table, the same one Robert used to eat breakfast at every morning for 30 years. Vanessa's mother was just telling me how important it is for you two to be self-sufficient. There was a pause, longer than the one from the birthday phone call. Mom, that's got nothing to do with this. This is the business. This is different. Is it? Please, he said, and there it was, the same voice from the hospital hallway 30-some years ago, the same voice that used to say, I promise, Mom, except now it was asking, not vowing. I wouldn't ask if I had another option. I wired him the money the next morning. I told myself it was different this time, a business, an investment, not charity. I told myself Carol's little lecture on self-sufficiency didn't apply to emergencies, and that every family has its exceptions. What I didn't ask, what I should have asked that morning sitting at Robert's old table with the bank's confirmation screen glowing in front of me, was how many differences, how many exceptions it would take before I noticed I was the only one still keeping count. The $8,000 became a habit disguised as a series of one-time favors. I want to be precise about this because it matters. It wasn't one large betrayal I could point to and say, there, that's where it went wrong. It was a slow accumulation of small ones, each so reasonable on its own that I never stopped to add them up until much later, when the total took my breath away. Over the next year, there was the equipment lease again, just a top-up, Mom. We're so close to breaking even. There was a temporary gap when Vanessa lost her job at the marketing firm, which Daniel explained to me over the phone with the careful diplomacy of a man walking through a minefield. She's applying everywhere, he said. It's just, with only my income for a few months, we're a little underwater on the mortgage. How underwater? $2,200. Just for this month. Maybe next month too. But she's got 2 interviews already, so. I'll send it today, I said. I always said some version of that sentence. I'll send it today. It became so automatic that I stopped hearing myself say it. It was around this time I began to notice something odd. Not dramatic, just odd. A letter arrived at my house addressed to me. From a bank I didn't recognize, referencing an account I didn't recognize either. I nearly threw it out as junk mail before something made me open it. It was a credit inquiry notice. Someone had run a credit check using my social security number, applying for a personal line of credit. I called the number on the letter, sat on hold for 11 minutes listening to a tinny version of a song I couldn't place, and finally reached a representative who informed me that yes, an application had been submitted 3 weeks earlier, and no, it hadn't been approved, insufficient information provided. Can you tell me who submitted it? I asked. I'm sorry, ma'am. I can only confirm it was submitted using your information. I can't disclose further details without the applicant present or a fraud case opened. I remember standing in my kitchen holding that letter, feeling a strange, cold quiet settle over me. Not yet suspicion, not exactly, but the first small crack in the smooth surface of things. I called Daniel that evening. Hey, Mom, what's up? Did you apply for a line of credit using my information? The silence on the other end lasted just slightly too long. What? No, why would you? I got a letter, Daniel. From a bank. Someone tried to open a credit line using my social security number 3 weeks ago. Mom, that's probably just identity theft. That happens to people all the time now. You should call the bank. Maybe put a fraud alert on your... I already called the bank, I said. They confirmed the application. They just wouldn't tell me who submitted it. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, quieter, faster, the voice of a man choosing his next words very carefully. Okay, look, it's not what it sounds like. Vanessa and I were looking at consolidating some of the smaller debts, and there was a program that lets you apply using a family member's information if they previously co-signed something for you, as like a joint applicant thing. And I thought since you'd helped before, it would just be easier, and I meant to tell you before it went through. But it got declined anyway, so I didn't think it mattered. You used my social security number, I said very slowly, without asking me. I was going to ask you. Mom, it was going to save us almost 4 points on the interest rate. And I know that sounds like nothing to you, but for us, it's real money. And it got declined, so it's not even. It doesn't matter that it got declined, I said. You used my identity, Daniel. Without my permission. That's not a favor. That's not an emergency. That's something else. Don't say it like that, he said, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I heard something like anger in his voice, not guilt. Anger. As though I were the one who'd done something wrong by noticing. I'm not some criminal, Mom. I'm your son. I was trying to fix things for my family, and yeah, maybe I should have called you first, I get that, but you're acting like I robbed a bank. I'm acting like a woman who just found out her son applied for credit in her name without telling her, I said. Because that's exactly what happened. There was a long silence. I could hear faintly Vanessa's voice in the background, asking something I couldn't make out, and Daniel's muffled response. I'm handling it, the words not meant for me, but landing on me anyway, sharp as anything he'd said directly. I'll fix it, he said finally. I'll make sure nothing like that happens again. I promise. I'd heard that promise before. In a hospital hallway. At a kitchen table. On a dozen phone calls asking for money, I always eventually sent. Okay, I said, because I still didn't know, not yet, how to be a mother who said anything else. But that night, for the first time, I didn't fall asleep telling myself it was nothing. I lay awake doing math I should have done years earlier. The equipment lease, the mortgage gap, the just this once that had become just this once perhaps a dozen times over. And for the first time, the number frightened me more than the idea of upsetting my son. I didn't know yet that the credit application wasn't a mistake he'd caught himself making. I didn't know it was the first thread of something much larger, something already stitched through more of my life than one letter could reveal. I only knew, lying there in the dark, that the ground under our relationship, the one I'd assumed was solid because I'd built it myself out of love, out of 30 years of believing the best of him, had just shifted very slightly for the very first time. It would not be the last. I'd like to tell you I changed after that phone call, that I drew a line, called a lawyer, put a freeze on my credit that very week. I did none of those things. I told myself I would, and then I let another 6 months slide, by exactly the way the 6 months before it had slid by, one small request at a time, each one wearing the disguise of an emergency. But I did start watching more closely. That was new, at least. I started noticing things I'd trained myself not to see. I noticed that Daniel never once mentioned the credit application again. Not to apologize further, not to tell me it had been resolved, not to explain what fixing it had actually meant. When I asked him about it a month later, almost casually, over the phone, he brushed past it so quickly I almost admired the skill of it. Oh, that? Yeah, all sorted. You don't need to worry about it, he said, already moving to the next topic. Something about a client dinner, a new supplier, anything but the thing I'd asked about. I noticed, too, that the request for money had started arriving with less explanation, not more, as though the early years of careful justification had given way to something closer to expectation. Mom, can you send $400 for the electric bill? They're threatening to shut it off Friday. No mention of why. No apology for asking. Just the number and the deadline. Delivered the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt. I sent it. Of course I sent it. But I remember sitting with the bank app open on my phone that particular evening, my thumb hovering over the confirm button, and thinking clearly for the first time, when did I become the emergency fund instead of the mother? The real crack, the one that finally forced a conversation I'd been avoiding, came at a family barbecue that summer at Daniel and Vanessa's house. I'd arrived early to help set up, which had become its own kind of ritual. Me arriving early to be useful, then quietly receding once the real guests arrived. I was in the kitchen slicing watermelon when I overheard Vanessa on the phone with Carol in the next room. Her voice pitched low, but not quite low enough. "No, Mom. I told you, we're fine. The equipment lease thing is handled. No, we didn't ask her for that one." Daniel found another way. A pause. Then, with a small, tired laugh in her voice. "I mean, obviously she doesn't know the half of it. If she knew how much we've actually gone through, I don't know, she'd probably have a heart attack. It's easier if she just thinks it's little stuff here and there." I stood very still, a knife in one hand, a slice of watermelon rocking gently on the cutting board in front of me. Little stuff here and there. I thought about the 8,000, the 2,200, the 400 for the electric bill, the credit application with my name on it. I had been keeping a mental ledger this whole time, telling myself it added up to generosity, to family, to the ordinary give and take of loving someone. Vanessa's version of that same ledger, apparently, was smaller, simpler. Little stuff here and there, a phrase that made years of my savings sound like pocket change I wouldn't miss, offered to a woman who didn't need to know the real total, because the real total might upset her. I set the knife down. I walked into the dining room, where Vanessa was still on the phone, and I waited, in full view, until she noticed me. She did notice. I watched the color drain slightly from her face, watched her recover with the practiced speed of someone used to smoothing over small emergencies. "Mom, I gotta go," she said into the phone and hung up. "How much is the half of it, Vanessa?" She blinked. "Eleanor, I didn't mean." "How much?" I said again. "Don't I know about?" She set her own phone down on the table, and for the first time since I'd known her, I watched Vanessa search for words instead of producing them instantly, effortlessly, the way she always seemed to. "It's not. I wasn't trying to hide anything from you, exactly. It's just, Daniel didn't want you to worry. There's more debt than what you know about. Some of it's old, from before we were even together. Some of it's newer. I don't think it's really my place to give you numbers. Honestly, that's between you and him. You just told your mother it would give me a heart attack." "That was an expression," Vanessa said quickly. "I didn't mean literally." "I think you meant it fairly literally," I said. "I think you meant that if I knew the real number, I would stop." She didn't answer that, which was, in its own way, an answer. Daniel came in from the backyard at that moment, tongs in hand, smelling of charcoal smoke, his face open and unsuspecting in a way that almost broke something in me, because I still, even then, wanted so badly for that openness to mean what it used to mean. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, looking between the two of us. "Your wife was just telling her mother that I don't know the half of what's actually going on with your finances," I said. "I'd like you to tell me the whole of it. Today. Not the version you think I can handle. The real number." The tongs lowered slightly in his hand. Behind him, through the sliding door, I could see Carol arriving in the driveway, right on schedule. Stepping out of her car with a covered dish and a smile already arranged for the party she assumed was still just a party. "Mom," Daniel said carefully, "can we talk about this after the barbecue?" "No," I said. "We're talking about it now." It was, I think, the first time in his entire adult life that I had ever told my son no, and meant it enough to hold the room until he answered me. Daniel set the tongs down on the counter, slowly, like a man buying himself time he didn't have. "Mom, it's complicated. There's stuff from the business, stuff from before Vanessa, and I don't need the history," I said. "I need the number." Behind him, through the sliding glass door, Carol was making her way up the driveway, the covered dish balanced against her hip, calling out something cheerful to a neighbor. We had, at most, 90 seconds before she walked through that door and the conversation folded itself back into performance. "Just tell her, Daniel," Vanessa said quietly. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at him, and there was something in her voice I hadn't expected. Not malice, just exhaustion, the sound of someone tired of carrying a secret that was never fully hers to carry. Daniel exhaled. Okay. He ran a hand through his hair. "It's around 91,000. Total. Across everything. The shop, the house, some cards, he hesitated, the line of credit thing." The number landed in the room like something physical. $91,000, I repeated. That includes what you've already given us, he said quickly, as if that detail might soften it. It's not all new debt. Some of it's just existing that we've been managing. Managing, I said. Is that what we're calling it? The front door opened. Carol's voice arrived a half second before she did. Knock, knock. I come bearing potato salad and unsolicited opinions, as usual. She stopped in the doorway, taking in the three of us standing in a triangle of silence, the abandoned tongs, Vanessa's face mine. Did I interrupt something? Not at all, Vanessa said, too quickly, too brightly. We were just talking about the party. Carol's eyes moved to me, assessing, the way they had at Thanksgiving. Eleanor, you look flushed, dear. Everything all right? I just learned my son is $91,000 in debt, I said, part of which he took out using my social security number without my knowledge. So no, Carol, not everything is all right. I watched the potato salad tilt slightly in her hands. Daniel, Carol said, turning to him with an expression I couldn't quite read, surprise, maybe, or the particular kind of alarm a person feels when a carefully managed room suddenly stops being managed. Is that true? It's not as bad as it sounds, Daniel said, which is a sentence I have come to understand means precisely the opposite of what it claims. How is a fraudulent credit application not as bad as it sounds? I asked. It wasn't fraudulent exactly, he said. I used information you'd given me before for the equipment lease cosign. I thought it would count as authorized use since you'd already. I authorized one lease, Daniel. One. Not blanket permission to use my identity whenever it was convenient. I know that now, he said. I do. I'm not trying to make excuses. You're doing an excellent job of it regardless. Carol set the potato salad down on the counter with great care, the gesture of someone trying to look composed while recalibrating quickly. Eleanor, I think we should all just take a breath. I'm sure this is a shock, but surely. Carol, I said, and something in my voice must have surprised even me, because she stopped mid-sentence. You told me at Thanksgiving how important self-sufficiency was, how you and Vanessa didn't believe in outside help. I'd like to know where that principle was while my son was applying for credit using my identity to cover debts neither of you told me the real size of. I didn't know the details, Carol said. That's between Daniel and you. Your daughter knew, I said. She told you on the phone 20 minutes ago that I don't know the half of it. So let's not pretend this was a private matter between mother and son. It was a private matter between the three of you that I was simply expected to keep quietly funding without ever seeing the whole picture. Nobody spoke. Somewhere outside, a group of party guests laughed at something, oblivious, the sound almost obscene against the silence inside. Daniel finally looked at me. Really looked the way he used to as a boy when he'd broken something and was trying to decide whether honesty or explanation would save him faster. Mom, I never meant to hurt you. I was scared. I've been scared for years, honestly, and it felt easier to handle it in pieces than to sit you down and tell you the real number, because I knew what your face would look like right now. This exact look. And I didn't want to be the reason you looked like that. So instead, I said, you decided I'd rather be deceived than disappointed. He didn't answer that. I don't think there was an answer that wouldn't have made it worse. I want everything, I said. Every account, every debt, every place my name or my information has been used, in writing, by the end of this week. And I want to know exactly what the equipment lease cosign actually authorized, because I remember signing one document, not opening a door. Mom, come on. Can we not do this at the barbecue in front of... You didn't think twice about doing this to me in the quiet of your own kitchen, I said. I'm not particularly concerned about doing this in front of your guests. I picked up my purse from the counter, the same counter where I'd been slicing watermelon 20 minutes earlier as though it were an ordinary afternoon, and I walked past Carol, past the potato salad, past the sliding glass door where a dozen people were laughing in the sunshine, entirely unaware that the woman walking through their party had just discovered the actual shape of the last several years of her life. I didn't stay for the barbecue. I drove home with the windows down, the summer air loud around me, and I did not cry, which surprised me more than anything else that day. I had expected grief. What I felt instead, sitting at the stoplight 2 blocks from my own quiet street, was something closer to clarity, cold, clean, and entirely new. $91,000. My name on documents I'd never signed. A daughter-in-law telling her mother it was easier if I simply didn't know. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I stopped asking myself how I could help my son. I started asking myself, instead, what it was going to cost me if I kept trying. He sent pieces. A partial statement here, a vague summary there, always accompanied by some version of, I'm still gathering everything. It's more complicated than I thought. Weeks passed, then months. I stopped asking directly and instead began quietly gathering my own picture of things. A call to my bank, a credit freeze finally put in place, a slow, careful inventory of what I could verify myself. I didn't confront him again. Not yet. I told myself I was waiting for the full picture before I decided what to do with it. The truth, I think now, is that some part of me was still hoping he'd surprise me, that he'd show up one day with every document laid out on my kitchen table and say, Mom, here's everything. I'm sorry. Let's fix this together. He never did. Instead, the next real turning point arrived on my 70th birthday. I hadn't expected much. I'd stopped expecting much, if I'm honest. But a week beforehand, I called Daniel and asked, plainly, if he'd have dinner with me. Just the two of us. No Vanessa, no Carol, no barbecues full of other people's conversations. Just my son, across a table, the way it used to be. Of course, Mom, he said. Name the place. I picked a small Italian restaurant Robert and I used to go to for our anniversary. White tablecloths, candles in old wine bottles, a waiter named Antonio who'd worked there for as long as I could remember. I told Daniel the date, the time, 7 o'clock, and he wrote it down or said he did. 3 days before my birthday, he called. Mom, I feel terrible, but something's come up with work. A client emergency, I can't get out of it. Can we push dinner to next week? I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment. It's my birthday, Daniel. Not a Tuesday. I know, and I feel awful. But this client, if I don't handle this personally, we could lose the whole account. And after everything with the money situation, I really can't afford. Fine, I said, because by then, arguing had started to feel like throwing stones into water. Next week, then. I told myself I understood. Work is work. Emergencies happen. I made myself a small dinner at home that night. Pasta, a glass of wine, a slice of store-bought cake I ate alone at my kitchen table, the same table Robert used to sit at every morning, the same table where I'd once done math on $8,000 loans and told myself it would be fine. It might have ended there, quietly, sadly, unremarkably, if a small thing hadn't happened 3 days later. I'd gone into town to pick up a prescription, and on the way home, I decided spontaneously, the way you do sometimes when nostalgia gets the better of you, to stop by that same Italian restaurant just to see it, just to sit at the bar and have a glass of wine by myself in a place that reminded me of easier years. I saw them before I reached the door. Through the window, Daniel, in a blue button-down I recognized, laughing at something. Across from him, Vanessa. Beside her, Carol, gesturing animatedly with a fork, the table set with wine glasses and what looked distinctly like a small cake, with a candle already half melted down. My birthday. The work emergency that couldn't wait. I stood on the sidewalk for what felt like a very long time, though it was probably only seconds, watching my son celebrate something, some occasion, in the very restaurant he'd claimed he was too busy to sit in with me, with the two women who'd spent the last several years quietly rearranging the family in their own favor. I walked in. Antonio spotted me first, delighted, already moving to greet me. Eleanor, it's been too long, come. Just a moment, Antonio, I said and walked toward the table. Daniel saw me when I was perhaps 6 feet away. I watched the laughter drain out of his face in real time, watched him go through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, recognition, something that might have been shame if he'd let it fully arrive. Mom, he said, what are you? I was picking up a prescription nearby, I said, my voice perfectly level. I thought I'd stop in for a glass of wine. Imagine my surprise. Vanessa's face had gone very still. Carol, to her credit or perhaps simply out of self-preservation, said nothing at all. This isn't what it looks like, Daniel said, which is, I've come to learn something people only say when it is precisely what it looks like. It looks like my son had a work emergency so severe he couldn't have dinner with his mother on her 70th birthday, I said, but not so severe that he couldn't sit in this exact restaurant at this exact hour with a cake, celebrating something with your wife and her mother instead. It's Vanessa's promotion, Daniel said. It just came through today. It wasn't planned. We just wanted to. You didn't think to invite me to that either, I said. Or was that also a mix-up with the venue's capacity? Vanessa flinched slightly at that. A small, precise reference she alone would fully understand, the ghost of a 40th birthday party years earlier still doing its quiet work. I looked around the table. The candle, the half-eaten cake, the bottle of wine, good wine, the kind Daniel used to say he couldn't afford when asking me for rent money. I turned to Antonio, who was hovering nearby, uncertain what to do with the sudden tension at a table he'd probably assumed was simply a happy family celebration. Antonio, I said, could you put a bottle of your best Prosecco on my son's tab and bring me a glass? It is, after all, my birthday too. I'd like to at least toast it somewhere in this restaurant, even if it's not at his table. Antonio, bless him, understood immediately what kind of moment this was and moved off without a word. Mom, please sit down, let us explain. No, I said, quiet enough that only our table could hear it, steady enough that every word landed exactly where I meant it to. I don't think I will. I think I'll sit at the bar by myself and enjoy my birthday glass of wine in peace, while you finish celebrating whatever it is you're celebrating tonight. And on the way out, I think I'll settle my own tab, because I've realized recently that I'm quite tired of being the one who quietly pays for things I'm not actually included in. I turned and walked to the bar, aware of the sudden hush that had fallen over not just our corner of the restaurant, but several nearby tables, diners glancing over with the particular fascinated discomfort people reserve for watching a family unravel in public. I sat down. Antonio brought my Prosecco, and I drank a toast alone to 70 years, the ones with Robert, the ones raising a son I no longer entirely recognized, and the ones I understood clearly now that I had left to build without anyone else's permission. Behind me, I could hear Carol murmuring something to Vanessa, low and urgent. I didn't turn to listen. For the first time in years, what happened at that table no longer felt like my responsibility to manage. I finished my wine. I paid my own bill. And I walked out of that restaurant a very different woman than the one who'd walked in. I let most of the calls go to voicemail. The messages were some version of the same thing. Mom, please call me back. I feel terrible. I want to explain. Can we talk? His voice each time a little more strained, a little less certain that this particular apology would work the way his apologies always used to work. I didn't enjoy withholding forgiveness. I want to be honest about that. There's a version of this story where I tell you I felt powerful, finally setting a boundary, and there's some truth in that. But mostly in that first week, I just felt tired. Tired in a way that went past sleep. The kind of tired that comes from realizing you've spent years building your understanding of someone on a foundation that was never quite solid. I did eventually agree to see Daniel, alone, at my house on a Sunday afternoon. He arrived looking smaller than I remembered, which I understand now was probably just the absence of Vanessa and Carol standing behind him, filling in his posture with their own certainty. Mom, I am so sorry, he said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. About the birthday. About all of it, honestly. I've been a coward. I let Vanessa and Carol handle a lot of things because it was easier than facing you myself, and that's on me, not them. I let him talk. I'd learned, by then, that letting Daniel talk uninterrupted usually told me more than any question I could ask. I want to make things right, he said. I really do. I'm going to get you the full accounting this month, I promise, and I want to figure out a real repayment plan, something structured, so it's not just me calling you every few months asking for. All right, I said. Send me the accounting. We'll talk about a plan once I see the real numbers. He left that afternoon looking, I thought, genuinely lighter. And for about 10 days, I let myself believe something had actually shifted. Then came the Tuesday I wasn't supposed to be at their house. I'd driven over to drop off a serving dish Vanessa had left at my place months earlier, something I'd been meaning to return and kept forgetting. I let myself in through the side gate, the way I always had, intending to leave the dish on the patio table since no cars seemed to be in the driveway. Except Daniel's car was there after all, tucked further back than usual, and the kitchen window was cracked open to the summer air. I heard Vanessa's voice before I saw her. But that's exactly my point. If we wait for her to just come around on her own, we could be waiting years, and meanwhile she could change the will again, put everything into some trust we can't touch. She's not going to just hand it over, Daniel said. His voice sounded tired, but not, I noticed, particularly resistant. Not after the restaurant thing. She barely wants to talk to me as it is. Which is exactly why we need to move on this now. While there's already a narrative that something's off with her, Vanessa said. Carol's friend, the one whose father went through this, she said the key is documenting erratic behavior early. The birthday thing actually helps us, honestly. A woman making a scene in a restaurant, showing up somewhere she wasn't invited, insisting on buying herself drinks to make a point. A judge could easily read that as instability if we frame it right. I stood very still on the other side of that cracked window, the serving dish heavy and forgotten in my hands. I don't love calling it instability, Daniel said. She's my mother. She's sharp as anything, you know that. I'm not saying she's actually losing it, Vanessa said, and there was an edge of impatience in her voice now, the tone of someone repeating a point she felt shouldn't need repeating. I'm saying, on paper, with the right doctor, with enough documented incidents, the money situation, the scene at the restaurant, maybe some testimony from Carol about how she overreacts, we could get a conservatorship evaluation started. It doesn't even need to succeed completely, Daniel. Even just filing it puts pressure on her to settle things quietly, on our terms, rather than dragging this out through lawyers for years. And if it does succeed, Daniel asked quiet. Then we manage her finances, Vanessa said, simply, as though she were describing a household chore rather than the legal erasure of my independence. The house alone is worth what, 600? Plus whatever's left in savings after everything you two have already gone through. We wouldn't be taking anything that isn't going to end up as your inheritance eventually anyway. We'd just be managing the timeline. I don't know how long I stood there after that. Long enough that my arms began to ache from the weight of a serving dish I no longer had any intention of quietly leaving on the patio table. I want to tell you, I stormed in through that door and said something searing, something they'd remember for the rest of their lives. That's not what happened. What happened is that I set the dish down very carefully on the patio table exactly where I'd planned to leave it, and I walked back out through the side gate, and I got into my car, and I sat in the driveway of home Robert, and I had helped them purchase the down payment for, and I did not cry. I drove home in silence. No radio. Just the sound of my own thoughts, which were, for the first time in this entire ordeal, perfectly clear. They weren't planning to wait for me to come around. They were planning to have me declared unfit, to use a birthday dinner I hadn't been invited to, a scene I hadn't started, as evidence that I couldn't be trusted with my own life. They were going to take the house Robert and I had built our marriage inside of, the savings I'd spent 30 years assembling, and manage it themselves on their own timeline, with a lawyer and a sympathetic doctor and Carol standing by to testify that her son-in-law's mother overreacts. I sat in my kitchen that evening, the same kitchen where I'd once done math on $8,000 loans. Indeed, I understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, that the woman who used to live in that kitchen, the one who forgave everything, who explained everything away, who believed that family doesn't keep score, was not going to be the one who handled what came next. I picked up the phone. Not to call Daniel. I called a lawyer instead. The lawyer's office was on the third floor of a building downtown, above a dry cleaner's, with a waiting room that smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. Her name was Patricia Olson, and Marjorie, my neighbor, the one who'd first shown me the photos from Daniel's 40th birthday all those years ago, had recommended her after I finally told her, in pieces, over 2 cups of tea at my kitchen table, what I'd overheard through that cracked window. Eleanor Hayes, Patricia said, shaking my hand. Sit down, please. Marjorie tells me you need someone who doesn't flinch easily. I need someone who understands conservatorship, I said, and how to prevent one. Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly, though her expression otherwise stayed perfectly composed. The look I imagine, of a woman who has heard far stranger things in that office than an elderly widow calmly announcing that her son and daughter-in-law might be plotting against her. Tell me everything, she said. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out because you think it makes you look foolish. I promise you I've heard worse. So I told her. The loans, the credit application, the birthday, the conversation through the kitchen window, which I repeated to her almost word for word, surprising myself with how clearly I still remembered it. When I finished, Patricia sat back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. First, she said, I want you to understand something important. What you overheard, while deeply upsetting and frankly appalling, is not, on its own, enough for a court to do anything to you. Conservatorship proceedings require documented evidence of genuine incapacity. A birthday dinner incident, however they choose to frame it, is not that. A pattern of you making large, unexplained gifts to your son, on the other hand, is exactly the kind of thing that could be twisted to build a narrative if they wanted to try. So I should stop helping him, I said. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your own son, Patricia said. But I will tell you, professionally, that if you want to protect yourself, the goal is to make yourself a difficult, boring, well-documented target. Judges do not like conservatorship petitions built on shaky evidence brought by family members with an obvious financial interest in the outcome. We're going to make sure that if this ever goes anywhere near a courtroom, it looks exactly like what it is. Over the following weeks, I became, in Patricia's words, extremely well documented. We updated my will, not dramatically, not vindicatively, but carefully, moving the bulk of my estate into a revocable trust with clear, professionally witnessed language about my mental competency at the time of signing, including a formal cognitive assessment from my own doctor, unprompted, simply for the record. Get this evaluation done now, Patricia told me. While there's no dispute, no lawsuit, nothing contested. That way, if anyone ever tries to claim you were declining around this time, we have a doctor's clean, dated assessment saying otherwise. I sat for that assessment on a Thursday morning, answering a series of questions from a kind, unhurried physician named Dr. Okafor. The date, the season, a short list of words to remember and repeat back 20 minutes later. I passed easily, unsurprisingly, and left with a report that would sit quietly in Patricia's files, waiting to be useful only if it ever needed to be. I also, on Patricia's advice, moved a portion of my savings into accounts Daniel had no knowledge of, no access to, no way of tracing through the informal familiarity that comes from years of a mother who'd never had reason to hide anything from him before. You're not doing anything wrong, Patricia reminded me, more than once, watching my hesitation over the paperwork. This isn't revenge, Eleanor. This is a woman protecting her own resources from people who've already shown you what they're capable of. I told one other person the full truth during those weeks. My oldest friend, Diane, who I'd known since we were both new mothers pushing strollers around the same park, 40-some years earlier. I always thought Vanessa had a coldness to her, Diane said, over coffee at her kitchen table, shaking her head slowly. I never said anything because what do you say? Your son's wife seems calculating. You'd have thought I was jealous. I wish you had said something, I told her. Would you have listened? I thought about that honestly before answering. No, I said. Probably not. I think I needed to hear it from them myself, through that window, before I could believe it. So what happens now? I looked down at my coffee, turning the cup slowly in my hands. Now, I said. I finished quietly putting everything in order. And then I let Daniel show me one more time exactly who he is when he thinks I'm not paying close enough attention. Diane raised an eyebrow. And if he shows you something better than what you're expecting, then I'll be glad to be wrong, I said. But I'm not going to base my future on the hope of it. I didn't tell Daniel about the lawyer. I didn't tell him about the trust, or the cognitive assessment, or the accounts he no longer had visibility into. When he called, I answered pleasantly, the way I always had, and let him believe the ordinary rhythm of our relationship was slowly repairing itself. A phone call here, a brief visit there, nothing that would tell him I now understood, with total clarity, exactly what he and Vanessa were capable of when they believed the outcome was worth it. I was, for the first time in years, one full step ahead of my own family. It was an uncomfortable feeling. I won't pretend otherwise. There is a particular loneliness in loving someone while quietly preparing for the version of them you now know exists. But it was also, unmistakably, the first time since Robert died that I felt entirely in control of what happened to me next. I didn't yet know what the final move would look like. I only knew, watching Patricia file the last of the paperwork on a gray Thursday afternoon, that whatever Daniel and Anessa were planning, they were planning it for a woman who no longer existed, the one who forgave everything away, and could be counted on to keep quietly funding a life she'd been carefully excluded from. That woman, I was fairly sure, wasn't coming back. I want to tell you the final push came from something dramatic. It didn't. It came from a text message sent on an ordinary Wednesday morning while I was still in my robe drinking coffee at the kitchen table. Daniel, hey mom, so the cruise plans changed a bit. Vanessa and her family are doing a smaller group this time, just immediate family. I know we talked about you coming along for the Alaska trip in the fall, but it's gotten complicated. I'm really sorry. I read it twice. Then a second message arrived, 30 seconds later, before I'd even set my phone down. Daniel, Vanessa feels like it should just be her side this round, since her grandmother's health isn't great and this might be one of the last big trips with her. I hope you understand. We'll do something just as soon, I promise. I sat with those two messages for a long time, my coffee going cold in front of me. I understood, of course. I understood perfectly. I understood that just immediate family apparently no longer included me, the woman who had funded a fair portion of that family's existence for the better part of a decade. I understood that a grandmother whose health wasn't great somehow outranked a mother who was, by every legal definition Patricia and Dr. Okafor could produce, entirely, robustly competent. I understood, most clearly of all, that this was never really about a cruise. It was, I believe now, a test, a small, almost careless test, the kind you run when you're no longer worried about the results. If I accepted this exclusion quietly, the way I'd accepted the 40th birthday, the barbecue, the seating chart at Thanksgiving, it told them something useful, that I still hadn't fully understood what I'd overheard through that kitchen window, that I could still be managed. I did not text back immediately. I sat at my kitchen table in Robert's old chair and I thought about $91,000 and a credit application with my name on it, and a conversation about conservatorship evaluations conducted in low voices through a cracked window, and a birthday dinner celebrated without me at a restaurant I'd chosen for my own anniversary years earlier. Then I picked up the phone and called Patricia. "It's time," I said when she answered. "Tell me what happened," she said, and I could hear, faintly, the sound of her setting down whatever she'd been doing. I read her the text. There was a brief pause on the line. "Eleanor," she said, "are you certain? Once we move on this, there's no quiet walking it back. The house sale alone will take some weeks to finalize, but the moment you stop the transfers and close the joint accounts, they will know. Immediately." "I'm certain," I said. "I've been certain for weeks. I was only waiting to see if they'd give me a reason to stop waiting." "Well," Patricia said, "it sounds like they just did." That afternoon, I called my bank and stopped every recurring transfer connected to Daniel's accounts, the small monthly contribution I'd been quietly making toward the mortgage, the emergency fund line I'd set up years earlier that he could draw from without asking, all of it closed within the hour. I called the realtor Patricia had recommended weeks earlier, a brisk, efficient woman named Renata who'd already walked through my house once, quietly, on a day I told Daniel I was getting some things checked by a contractor. "We can list by Friday," Renata told me. "Given the market right now and the neighborhood, I wouldn't be surprised if we have an offer within 2 weeks. "Do it," I said. I spent that evening walking slowly through my house, the kitchen where Robert used to eat breakfast, the hallway where Daniel used to run in his socked feet, the garage where Robert had died with a wrench still in his hand. I touched things I wasn't planning to keep. I made a short list of what I wanted moved into storage, and a much longer list of what I didn't. I did not tell Daniel any of this. I let 3 days pass, responding to his text about the cruise with a single, calm line. "That's disappointing, but I understand. I hope your grandmother-in-law feels better." A message so mild, so entirely unremarkable, that it gave him nothing to worry about at all. By the following week, the house was listed. By the week after that, we had 2 offers above asking. I signed the paperwork at Renata's office on a Tuesday morning, the same week Daniel and Vanessa were, as far as I knew, still finalizing their own cruise itinerary for the fall. I told Diane the plan over coffee, the same kitchen table where we'd had that first honest conversation weeks earlier. "You're really doing it," she said. Not a question so much as an acknowledgement. "I'm really doing it," I said. "Where will you go?" I smiled, for what felt like the first time in months without any weight behind it. Robert always wanted to see the coast in Oregon. We never made it. I thought I'd finally go. Alone. "For now," I said. "I've spent so many years arranging my life around what my family needed from me. I'd like to spend a little while arranging it around what I need for once." The closing on the house went through on a quiet Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks after that first text about the cruise. I signed the final papers, shook Renata's hand, and drove to a storage facility to drop off the last of the boxes I was keeping. Photographs, mostly, and the wrench from Robert's toolbox, the one still sitting on his workbench the morning he died, which I could never quite bring myself to leave behind. Daniel didn't know any of it had happened. Not the house, not the closed accounts, not the trust or the assessment or the quiet, careful months of preparation that Patricia and Renata and Diane had helped me build, brick by brick, while he was busy planning a cruise that no longer had room for me. He was about to find out, though, because the fall cruise was 2 weeks away, and when Daniel and Vanessa returned from it, expecting the same steady, quiet mother waiting patiently on the other end of things, the world they came home to was not going to look anything like the one they'd left. I heard about the return, oddly enough, secondhand, from Diane, who'd heard it from Marjorie, who apparently still followed Vanessa's social media, even after everything. "They're back from the cruise," Diane told me over the phone. "And Eleanor, I think Daniel's been calling you all morning." He had been. 11 missed calls by the time I finally looked at my phone, sitting on the porch of the small rented cottage I'd taken on the Oregon coast, the one with a view of gray water that Robert had always talked about seeing someday. I let the 12th call ring through to voicemail and made myself a cup of tea before I finally listened to it. His voice was tight, fast, unraveling at the edges in a way I'd genuinely never heard from him before. "Mom, it's Daniel. Please call me back." "The house. There are people living in our old house, Mom. Your house, they said they closed on it weeks ago. And I went by the bank and the accounts, the transfers, everything's, Mom. Please, just call me. I don't understand what's happening. I'm scared. Please call me back." I sat on that porch for a long while after listening to it, watching the waves come in steady and indifferent, the way they'd been coming in for longer than any of us had been alive, and would keep coming in long after we were gone. Then I called him back. "Mom." He picked up before the first ring finished. "Mom, thank God. What is going on?" I drove by the house. There's a family moving boxes in. They said they bought it 2 months ago, and the bank said the mortgage assistance account was closed. And I can't get through to you. I've been calling for... "I know," I said. "I saw the calls." "You knew." His voice cracked slightly on the word. "Mom, you sold the house?" "Without telling me." "It was my house, Daniel," I said. "I didn't need to tell you anything." There was a long silence on the line. I could hear, faintly, Vanessa's voice in the background, tense, urgent, asking something I couldn't make out. "Okay," Daniel said finally, his voice lower now, more careful. "Okay, I understand you're upset about the cruise. I get that, I really do. And I'm sorry, we should have handled that differently. But this, Mom, this is my inheritance. This is..." "It was mine to sell," I said again quietly. "Not yours to inherit early, because you were disappointed I found out what you and Vanessa were planning to do to me." The silence this time was different. Longer. Heavier. "What are you talking about?" Daniel said, and something in his voice told me he already knew exactly what I was talking about, even as he asked. "I was at your house in July," I said, dropping off a serving dish. The kitchen window was open. I let that sentence sit there, unadorned, and listened to my son understand, in real time, precisely how much I knew. "Mom," his voice had gone very quiet. "Mom, it wasn't as bad as it sounds. We were just talking through options. We weren't actually going to..." "You were discussing which doctor might be sympathetic," I said. You were discussing how a scene I didn't start at a restaurant I chose for my own anniversary could be used as evidence that I was unstable. You were discussing my house as an asset to be managed on a timeline. I heard all of it, Daniel. Every word. He didn't try to argue the facts. I'll give him that much. What came instead, after a long pause, was something quieter and somehow harder to hear than any denial would have been. I didn't want to do that, he said. I want you to know that. It was Vanessa's idea, mostly, and Carol's. I kept saying I didn't like it. I kept saying you were sharp as anything. But Mom, I was drowning. The debt, the business, all of it. I told myself if it came from a lawyer, from a doctor, it would be gentler somehow than just asking you outright for the last of what you had. I told myself it would look like something we were doing for you instead of to you. There is no version of taking someone's independence away that is being done for them, Daniel. Not without their consent. I know that now, he said, and for the first time in this entire, exhausting unraveling, I believed he actually meant it. I've known it since the second I saw people moving boxes into your house and realized you were 3 steps ahead of us the whole time. I don't even know what to say to you. I don't know how to fix this. I'm not sure it's something you fix, I said. I think it's something you live with, the way I've had to live with understanding what my own son was capable of. Are you ever coming back? His voice had gone small, in a way that reminded me, despite everything, of the boy who used to run through the hallway in his socked feet, 30-some years earlier. I don't know yet, I said honestly. I know I'm not coming back to the way things were. That version of our family, the one where I quietly pay for things and quietly get left out of things and quietly absorb whatever's easiest for everyone else, that version is finished. If there's something worth building instead of that, I'm willing to hear what you think it looks like. But I'm not going to be the only one building it this time. He was quiet for a long moment. That's fair, he said finally. That's more than fair, honestly. I have a lawyer now, Daniel. A real one, involved in everything. If you want a relationship with me going forward, it happens through honesty, in writing when it needs to be, and it happens because you actually want your mother in your life, not because you're managing an asset on a timeline. I do want you in my life, he said. I know I have a strange way of showing it. I know I have a lot to prove. Yes, I said. You do. I didn't offer to fly home that week. I didn't promise a holiday visit or a reconciliation dinner or anything that might have made the conversation feel resolved before it had actually earned the right to be. I let the silence after his last sentence simply sit there, honest and unfinished, the way most real repair actually has to start. I stayed in Oregon another 6 weeks after that call. I walked the coastline most mornings, the way Robert and I always said we would someday, and in the evenings I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the water, thinking about the woman I'd been for most of my life, the one who gave until there was nothing left, who believed family meant never keeping score. I don't regret the years of giving. I want to be clear about that. I love my son fully. And for a long time, that love was returned in ways that felt real. Even if I understand now that it was tangled up with things that weren't love at all, convenience, expectation, the quiet assumption that I would simply always be there, absorbing whatever needed absorbing. What I regret is how long it took me to understand that love and self-erasure are not the same thing. That a mother can give generously and still, at some point, be allowed to stop. That protecting yourself from the people you love most isn't a betrayal of that love. Sometimes, it's the only way to keep any of it intact. Daniel and I are still talking, slowly, carefully, the way you rebuild something that's been badly cracked rather than simply patch over it and hope no one looks too closely. I don't know yet what we'll become to each other. I know it will never again be what it was before that cracked kitchen window. And I know, sitting here now, watching the Oregon coast do exactly what it's always done, indifferent and steady and entirely its own, that whatever comes next, I'll be the one who decides it. Not Daniel, not Vanessa, not Carol, with her quiet lectures on self-sufficiency, delivered in a kitchen my money helped pay for. Just me, for the first time in longer than I can remember. That feels like exactly enough.